everyone. So my name is Chris Sandy. Is this okay? And I am going to time this just because I really like to be try to keep my thing to a certain specific amount of time. But I am a lifelong entrepreneur. I've been working on entrepreneurial projects for a really long time. I started working on value-added product projects in 2011. Yeah. I started working on value-added product projects in 2011, and my wife and I lived in South Kona for a period of time, and then ultimately made our home in Waimea in 2017, and I've been working up here ever since. Just to kind of begin with the end in mind, I'm going to step through just kind of like a broad summary of the different projects that I've worked on, just kind of like the eras or arcs that I've spent time on. And then I'll do a deeper dive into some of the specific companies that I've worked on and what those projects look like. And then at the end, I'll dive into just like a handful of short bullet points on things that have come up related to scale in my consulting life repeatedly, just like themes where I kind of see the same consistent thing kind of over and over again. And for some of you, like it might be really formulae and you may have heard of it before and you're like, oh, yeah, I know. And then for other people, it might be useful. So I'm just hoping like 1 out of those 5 is useful for somebody. So yeah, that's what I'll dig into. This is just like general arc of the things that I've worked on, right? So when I say I've been an entrepreneur forever, I opened my first office when I was 16. I was still in high school. I was taking computer science courses at junior college. My software life, I guess when I started it, was relatively diverse. Like I would work on any project that would come my way. I did software for CRM systems for sales, for communication systems for ambulatory services, primitive mobile phone applications, like all kinds of stuff. Eventually, I narrowed my focus to medical imaging and medical device software, and specifically software for radiologists and for thermographers, and to a lesser extent, thermographers, to automate image analysis. And back then, we were using, today we call it artificial intelligence, but back then it was neural networks and machine learning and intelligence with like big quotes. And eventually I took on partners. That side of the business did really well. My partners and I had a successful exit. That was when I was in my early 20s. And we sold to a larger medical imaging company. And I think my experience at that point was the same as like a lot of software people, which is, I've noticed this just meeting people in my older life now, is just like, you leave software, you leave tech, and something about it, like it creates a lot of farmers and arborists and people that get into like food forests, and there's something about it where you like leave tech and then you go to the garden, and I was definitely in that camp, right? So as soon as I was done with software, I started volunteering at CSAs, at local farms, helping farms get certified organic, doing biodynamic certification. I learned about Wolf D. Storrell and Rudolf Steiner and their whole philosophy around farming. I helped co-found a company called Sustaining Technologies, which is basically like an alternative currency system for helping communities localize their spending power. So basically incentivizing more spending on local food and local food producers and helping keep money within an economy for longer. Because as you probably know, especially here in Hawaii, once a dollar leaves the community, it's very hard to get it to come back, right? So as soon as like, if you give a dollar to the bread maker and the bread maker gives it to the person that watches your kids, and as it circulates, it's more valuable to the community. And once it goes to Jeff Bezos, you will never see that dollar again. And so it was kind of like, that was the system that we were building. And it was around this time that I met Brett Jacobson. And if you're familiar with Ola and the Ola universe, Brett is the original founder for all the Ola products and Ola companies. And back then, it was pre-everything, right? So Brett had purchased a small farm in South Kona. And I think at that point, he had already started planting noni trees. And how many here are familiar with what a noni tree is, like noni fruit? Yeah, okay. So you know noni fruit, noni juice. it doesn't smell super great. It doesn't necessarily taste really great. It has these great health benefits when you ferment it. And so his idea was, I want to start a juice company based on noni fruit and noni fruit juice. And I had a background in business. I knew business development. I had done capital raises and venture capital work and business planning and all that kind of stuff. And so we started building something. And so Chris's brother, Chris Jacobson, or Brett's brother, Chris Jacobson, was really influential back then. I think the first fundraise for that project, for the very first noni products, we had done a crowdfunding campaign and we raised like $6,000, which was like 40,000 less than what we needed to do our first batch. So there was a lot of like friends and family money and things like that to like help get it going, but ultimately we did. And to kind of like fast forward into like the evolution of that, and actually before I dive into like the other products that came from that original noni juice and the noni shots and all the Ola products, I do think it's like good to touch on this like common thread that was important back then, which is permeated through all the Ola products even to this day. Because Ola, if you sort of followed it, now it is beer and cider and distilled products and and the common thread there was to kind of like flip the script on Hawaii's relationship with agriculture and ag economy from what it was to maybe like a smarter vision. So right now, if you zoom way out and you look at the Hawaii economy, it's basically like a three-pillared system. Most people kind of look at Hawaii's economy as like primarily based on tourism, and then after that it's military, and after that it's construction. And there's been a vision from some people for a long time of having like a fourth pillar to the economy, and they'll try to shoehorn in software, and that's never really worked. And then a smaller community of people will try to make agriculture work as like the fourth pillar for Hawaii's economy. But right now, it is largely tourism based. And so what we do right now is we make all of our money from tourism, we ship out our money in exchange for shipping in goods, right? And so the number is different depending on who you talk to, but some people say 80% of our food is imported, some people say 96% or 92%, and I've looked at all the studies and I don't really know what the real number is, but we all know that it's an overwhelming majority. Like most of the food produced in Hawaii, we import. And so what we do is we make our money on tourism, and then we ship out our money, and then we import our food. And like that's kind of the system. And the idea with Ola was, what if we could flip that? What if we could make enough locally grown things to not only support ourselves and have a certain amount of food sovereignty and also economic sovereignty, but what if we produced enough to have a surplus? And in that surplus, we were able to ship products out and kind of flip it. So now food is going out and money is coming in, and kind of lessening our reliance on tourism as being like the primary staple for the entire state's economy. During 2020, I think we all saw kind of like an uptick in that. Like suddenly it was like, oh, farmers were rock stars for a minute. And it was really cool actually to suddenly look at like local food producers and think like, wow, this is like, they're really important community members. So that was like a driving principle for the first Ola products. Eventually, those noni juice shots turned into sparkling drinks, noni sparkling drinks. Eventually, there was coffee leaf tea. And it was around the coffee leaf tea period of time, which is basically coffee leaves boiled into a tea. We made like a sparkling drink that was canned. It was around that period of time that a group of investors that was connected to Ola thought it would be a good idea for us to file for one of the cannabis licenses because it's also value-added ag. This is something you grow here that's HVAP, high value-added ag. And so we did that. And that application process was pretty challenging. I think we just didn't sleep for like 3 months. We were one of 67 applicants. I think we got the second highest score in the state. And I think Maui got the top score. And so we were ultimately awarded a medical cannabis license. That was while we were doing the noni project, right? So we were doing like noni things, we were doing coffee leaf tea, and this medical cannabis license was awarded to the same team. And there was this interesting period of time where the early roots of Ola Brew, which is kind of like the popular brand I think a lot of people know today, were taking hold in Kona. So it was just like the beginnings of that. And before it was Ola Brew, it was actually called Hawai'i Cider Company. We didn't think necessarily in the beginning that it was going to be beer. We thought it was going to be cider. It was going to be dragon fruit and pineapple and guava and all these other things. And it just turned out that like beer was the thing that people enjoyed sessionably more than cider. So it ended up working. So there was this period of time where that warehouse in Kona, that's the current brewery, was kind of home to all these things at once. There was a medical cannabis company in the warehouse. There was coffee leaf tea. There was noni juice and noni shots. There was Hawai'i Cider Company. There was the roots of Ola Brew. And it was like a strange time. It was actually around 2016. This is like, I think it was like Donald Trump first term time. And yeah, so it was just like strange. And I ended up taking a role at a Hawaiian Ethos, which is like the medical cannabis side, and I stayed there for 10 years. And during that period of time, I did the president, the CEO, a director job, vice president. I did kind of a lot of different executive jobs there, and it turned into a really great company, making good products with dozens of employees and 5 different sites and locations. And Ola continued to grow too. And I stayed on as an adjunct resource at Ola as a director and working on special projects. And throughout the Ola kind of universe of products coming into the world, the reach, I think, was really good. It ultimately, Noni products and Ola's products ended up getting into Whole Foods and Safeway and through UNFI and Walmart and like all these kind of major networks. So I got a really good understanding of like what it takes to get into those different chains and scaling up into them, and kind of the whole story of the whole arc of you start with like an idea and some noni fruit that tastes really bad all the way into now you're in Whole Foods in Southern California. And like what does that kind of like lineage look like for products? And so fast forward to today, I consult with, I spend about 30% of my time on the Ola side. Most of that is at the distillery for the new Okole Hau project. That's also value-added ag that's growing local tea root or key root and turning it into a spirit. And then up here in Kohala, one of the companies that I work with is actually Spicy Ninja, which you guys probably know because it's such a tight town and everybody kind of knows everything about all things Kohala. And so that's a project that I work on up here, as well as Ethos and La'opono and all that. Before I wrap up, though, I did want to touch on just like a handful of things that I think are consistent themes that come up with regard to scale. And these aren't in any special order, and they're not necessarily like the end-all be-all for like the recipe for scale, but they are definitely things in my consulting life that I notice come up quite a bit. So I'm just going to like quickly go through them. One of them is data as your friend. So basically, I think when you're relatively small, it's easy to overlook a general practice where you're keeping track of data. I'll meet people that are doing like farmers markets, or they're selling at local events or things like that. And then I'll ask them like, how is your sales? And sometimes they won't know. They're like, I don't know, I don't even count it. Or, you know, I spent half of what I made at the smoothie guy. And like, and sometimes I think it does feel small, and so it's not even worth writing down. And I think the earlier you get into the habit of writing down batches and batch logs and batch sizes and production efficiency and revenues and cost of goods, and just like, even if the numbers are small, jotting them down, I promise if you do 12 months of that, when you look back 12 months later and you look at your old data, it's valuable. And even if you're trying to make predictions about a farmer's market and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do markets this year, and you know, I wonder what my revenues are going to be. It's so cool to look back last year and be like, well, in June at this market, I did this. And overall, all my other sales have been 12% up this year, so maybe my market sales will be 12% up this year too. It also helps you set targets, which is super important too. So if you want to grow and you say, well, this is what last year's production numbers were, or production efficiency, or the amount of loss I had last year, and you establish, you know, how you want to modify that, it gives you a benchmark to grow from. So just like, even if it seems small, jotting down that data. I think project gauntlets are really important to identify early on. And these are just like really large, kind of fundamental things that are going to be crucial to the business that you might put to the back of your head because it's like somewhere in the future, and it's like okay to think about them early. Like some companies I work with, they'll be in the negative until they reach a certain economy of scale, let's say. So it's like, my company is in the red now, but once I get this bottling machine, my economy of scale and my efficiency will go up to a point where I'm actually making money. And it's like really good to identify like what that is, like what is that goal specifically, and when are you gonna hit it, and what do you need in order to hit it? And so that you actually kind of are able to make plans to progressively reach closer and closer to it. The other one is thought experiments, and they're just like cheap, and I do this constantly. Usually when I'm talking about, especially scale with entrepreneurs, they'll give me like a single or like a one metric for what they want to do in terms of scale. So say, what are you trying to do? And they'll say, well, I'm trying to grow my revenues from 50,000 to 100 this year, or from 1 million to 2, or 5 to 10, or whatever the number is. And it's like, that's a number, and that's one way of measuring what your scale might look like. But it's also just like great to really meditate on like what that means in other measures. Like, how many trucks is that? How much weight is that? Is that a ton of product? Is that, how many grocery stores is that you need to sell to? How many consumers shopping at those grocery stores population-wise will support that? How many labels, like when it's all stacked up in your warehouse, like how big is that? Like if we're standing in front of that 1 year, $5 million increase, like what does that feel like? And so I just think that those thought experiments to kind of like think multidimensionally about scale and your scaling numbers is a really good habit to get into. The other one, and this is like a really big one, is like easy supply chains. I think when you're young, when a project or a company is young, it's easy to have like really complicated supply chains because you have the bandwidth to sort of handle it. I was working with a company recently, and they had like this very obscure ingredient. It's like a flower that grew on like the Nile, and it was like super expensive, and it took up like 25% of their total COGS. And it was sort of like, if you removed it, would people pay any less for the product? And it was one of 15 ingredients, and it's like, probably not. Like it's probably, that's a really complicated thing you're building into your supply chain that you now have to manage that you wouldn't have to manage if you just removed it. And so, so often when we hear stories about scale and something got really, really big, often it's that the supply chain and the inputs started as scalable, and then people created businesses from that, right? Like there's like Cheerios is made of wheat, and it wasn't that like Cheerios created the wheat market, it was that wheat happens to be the most abundant, most drought tolerant, most resilient crop on planet Earth, so we made Cheerios out of it because it was infinitely scalable ingredient. And you see that in a lot of industries. And even for Ola, it was like, yeah, noni fruit is healthy, but a big part of why noni fruit in the beginning was like a super important fruit for us is because we knew agriculturally it was not going to be hard. This thing grows out of the rock in the middle of nothing with no water, no nutrients. It's just like bomb-proof. It's like, that's the crop that seems like a cool thing for us to grow. And so just thinking of just like easy supply chains, also in that is like managing single point of failure. So if your supply chain does have a critical single point of failure where it's like, as you grow, if this thing gets removed, or if this farm goes under, or this thing doesn't work out, like how much runway do you have before you go out of business? Is it like, are you buying like from a diversified commodities market or like a network of farmers? That way you're hedged, or is everything kind of in like one area, which is fragile for especially an early startup company. So yeah, I think one of the areas that I've seen this come up over and over again is actually with Ava businesses. And so you're familiar with Kava and Ava, and what'll happen is like really cool brands will start up and they'll create canned beverages or shots, and they'll be like, I'm gonna do an Ava shot, I'm gonna do an Ava beverage, and it's ready to drink. And they start scaling and they get into stores, and it's like, I got a Whole Foods contract. And very quickly, like they hit a really serious wall. And the wall is your whole production is dependent on a crop that really takes 4 years to grow to be like nice quality product. And so from the moment you plant it to when you get to harvest, it's 4 years. And if you want, 100% year-over-year growth, or you're scaling at any decent scale, you very quickly run into the place where you can't fulfill orders anymore. And once you start planning, it's already too late. Like if you weren't planning 4 years ago, you already kind of like fell off. And so I've seen a ton of these kava companies just do this, like because they weren't looking at this like easy supply chain thing. And the last thing is like a culture of scale. I think sometimes when companies are relatively small, you kind of don't think that you need to have as much formality. It can be less formal because it's like it's just us and we're just in the warehouse and we're just hanging out. But things like managing batch records and cleanliness and making your label really easy to read and having barcodes and having nutrition facts and just doing all that like basic compliance stuff early on, it helps. And what happens is if from the very beginning, even when it's a very small team, you install that kind of culture, as you grow, the new people that come on board don't know any different. Seth Godin likes to say, people like us do stuff like this. And I love that like way of describing companies as brands. And so as you bring people on, they'll just reinforce it. They'll be like, well, we've always kept really great batch records, and we've always looked at the efficiency of these things, and we've always done pH testing on every batch, and they'll get used to that, and it'll just become normal company culture, and it'll grow with you. And even when you're not on it, the rest of the culture will uphold it, and they'll be like, no, we don't do things like that. We do it like this. And so I think that's a key thing for scale. So I don't know, hopefully that's interesting. That's just a little bit on like my background and kind of some of the Ola history and some of these like scaling points. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Chris will be coming back. We're going to see a presentation from Andrew Trump right now from Island Harvest. And then we'll have some moderated questions, and then there'll be time for Q&A.
All right, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Maya. Yeah, really awesome to be able to present today, and I hope it just kind of continues building off of what Chris said. As Maya said, I'm Andrew Trump, no relation to our president, and I'm actually born and raised here in Kohala. My brother's in the back, he helps run the farm, and then my dad had to go take care of a wasp nest that my mom's dealing with at our house, and he is the founder of Island Harvest in 1991. So yeah, that's our dad. Hopefully he'll be back down here in a little bit. Nathan and I are the primary operators. But Island Harvest has always had a mission to steward Kohala's agricultural lands. We've always been based here. We've mostly been on lease lands. Just recently we were able to purchase 27 acres, but for the life of the company, it's been between 500 and 1,000 acres of mac nuts that are leased from different land holding companies. And I think a lot of people will be like, oh, you can't lease your land, right? And we've made it work since '91, and it's been difficult. It hasn't always we haven't been able to reinvest in the orchards like we've wanted to sometimes, and there's limitations with that. But don't let anybody tell you that there's one way that you have to do your business, because I think just hearing Chris's talk, it's kind of like I resonate with a lot of the things that he said, and then there's a lot of things that that everybody's kind of found their own path, and I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is it's more of a mindset than a blueprint, right? And I think all of our mindsets is one where we have a vision for the future and we kind of stick to that. Here's a quick video of the orchards, just to give you a sense of kind of what we do on our farm. That's mechanically harvesting mac nuts off the ground. They fall to the ground when they're ripe, and we harvest them with these finger wheel harvesters. That's me and my brother and my dad. And those are our products. So since 1991, when my dad first incorporated the company, until 2021, we were always wholesalers of in-shell mac nuts. So what that looked like is we would harvest them. They would go into bins like this or bags, and then we would send them off to other processors around the island. And you guys might know brands like Mac Farms, Mauna Loa, Hawaiian Host, Hamakua, Island Princess. So all the Mac nuts from our farm went into those products and those brands. And for a long time, that was a good way of doing business. You know, we never had any amazing years, but my dad's, you know, was doing that full time with a crew of, you know, between 15 to 30 at any given time, and it worked. But like over time, the margins on in-shell, like farm gate sales kind of dwindled, and we realized that we probably needed to pivot at some point. And now, in 2021 to present, we've slowly taken what we grow on our farm and built a brand around it, and slowly started putting more of the Mac nuts that we grow into our brand, selling it under the Island Harvest brand. And I think last year we maybe sold 10% of what our farm grew in like the wholesale bulk market, and 90% went into our brand. And that's not to say, like, yeah, I think a lot of people kind of preach like you have to do value add in order to make it as a farmer. And I think, you know, there is some truth to that. And I think for us, we realized when we needed to pivot towards it, because the macadamia like wholesale market was getting tight and it was getting harder and harder. But I also think, like, let's acknowledge that it was a good business for 30 years the way it was. And that also can work for people too. If your core competency is farming and you have a good like wholesale buyer, I think that's a good way to do business. And I kind of wish we were able to do more of that still. So in 2021, we launched our Mac nuts. There weren't many organic Mac nuts at the time in the market. And so we quickly kind of became the leader online and locally. And over time, more and more international businesses are growing organic Mac nuts. So we've like had more competition, but we really were able to find a niche. There's lots of Mac nuts from Hawaii. There's lots of Mac nuts overseas, but being organic Mac nuts from Hawaii was a small little niche that we're like, oh, this makes us different as a company, and let's see like how customers respond to it. And we found that they responded pretty well. So sorry, you're not gonna be able to see that, but some of our unique selling points are it's 100% Hawaiian Mac nuts. We don't import anything to supplement our supply. Our Mac nuts are all rain fed, so we don't use irrigation except on some of the youngest plantings, but our mature ones are rain fed. We do certified organic, sustainably farmed. We have a community give back portion, and we were able in past years when we were profitable to be able to give back to local nonprofits. And then keto was a big trend, like 3-4 years ago, and it's still kind of a trend, but we're sort of like not as big into keto. But for a while, that was a big marketing point. So getting started on the retail brand, I think 4 things that I looked at was, is there an opportunity? Can we do this? What does the competition look like? Are there other organic Mac nuts on the out there? And if there are, that's fine. But are we able to find our space on the shelf or our space online? What are the logistics going to look like, and how are we going to manage it? Because you can have a great plan, but at the end of the day, somebody has to execute on it, and that always is the hardest part for me personally. I have strengths and weaknesses just like everybody else, and certain weaknesses, come out when you're an entrepreneur because you have to do everything. So one of the first things we did, and it's kind of ironic that we're here at the Kohala Food Hub, is we bought a Mac nut butter company from a lady who lives up the street called Just Mac Nuts. And we started making Mac nut butter in the hub kitchen right over here before it burned down. And it was not going so well. We were losing money on the Mac nut butter every time. It was really labor intensive. We weren't really able to sell much. And then eventually like the hub burned down, and we're like, well, we're just gonna close up shop too. And so we just killed the Mac nut butter product, and we said, hey, look, we tried it, but it didn't work out for us. And I think that was a good lesson. It's like not every product's gonna work, or maybe the timing is just not right. But to get that started, we Googled a lot, talked to a lot of people in the food industry, in the mac nut industry. We started getting packaging design, and that designs that we got made ended up being kind of the blueprint for what our pouched product looks like today. So like it wasn't all for naught. And then we tried to figure out, you know, where could we produce this and where can we sell it? And yeah, I was not an expert at all, but over time you got to learn, right? So one of the things that I was talking to Maya about is I just kind of wanted to be like, you know, transparent about kind of how we went about it. And so feel free when we get into the question and answers, feel free to ask me anything. So the first thing that we did when we were starting the brand outside of the farm was I reached out to a local designer. They made those 2 logos, and that was the start. And it took a couple months, and all we had was a logo and nothing to put it on. And then over time, we used Shopify, and I think it was called WooCommerce, and we built a website. And then we started working on packaging design. And today, we use Savor Brands, which is a company based in Oahu, but they manufacture overseas, to get our packages and pouches created. And so this stuff kind of happened incrementally, and we still didn't really have a product, but we were kind of laying the foundation for what our product could be. So, you know, worked with a local designer on that. On the packaging design, I worked with a designer off of a website called 99 Designs, which is, if you ever heard of like Fiverr or Upwork, it's kind of like independent contractors that can do stuff for you. They made our first designs. We went to a local print house. They laid it out onto what they call a die line, and we picked out all the specs. And I think I feel fortunate that most of it kind of worked out. But now looking back on it, I've seen a lot of places where it's like, oh man, we could have made some bad mistakes. Like if your barcodes don't scan right, if your nutrition facts don't have, you know, the white panel behind them, they're all things that I think can derail people. And luckily, I think we had people along the way that were like, hey, don't do that. So it's always good to have another set of eyes on kind of what you're doing as you're creating a brand. You know what? I don't think this is going to show up because it's black on black. I'm going to just grab my computer really quick and see if it pops up. So one of the other things that I wanted to do is just kind of give you an idea of our margins breakdown. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this was to just, I mean, one, I like to, like, I think it's always helpful when people just kind of tell you how it is with their business so that you can kind of evaluate yours in a similar way. And I also think when I was first starting as an entrepreneur, I didn't understand how markups worked. And like, you know, if you have a product that you're selling for $5, if you sell it to a distributor, it's probably going to end up being $15. Just because of the markups along the way between the distributor and the grocery. And I kind of underestimated just how much that cost. And when we initially started our brand, it really hurt our profitability. And so that was difficult. Okay, so this is our 8-ounce bag of unsalted mac nuts. And it typically, I'm just going to start from the bottom actually. It retails on our website or in a lot of grocery stores around $18. But what goes into that is quite a bit. So our farming cost is about $3 a bag. Our processing cost is, we work with Hamakua mac nut that's about 25 minutes down the road, and we pay about $2 per 8 ounces for that. Our pouches are 25 cents a bag, which is actually pretty good because we produce them in mass. The boxes that they go into after we produce the pouches are 8 cents. And then we work at the Kohala Food Hub to bag and seal and nitrogen flush our products. And all the kind of labor and time to do that portion costs about $1. And so when we look at our 8-ounce bag of unsalted mac nuts, it costs us $6.33 of like direct cost of goods sold. And then we sell that for $9. So we're making roughly $2.70 for every bag that we sell, which sounds great, but it also doesn't include storage, transportation, advertising, accounting, office expense, or other overhead. And so I think when you're starting off, like this exercise, I think everybody can do, and if you haven't done it already, you can do it pretty quickly. Like, what is your cost? What goes into it? And then what is your selling point? And we've kind of changed it over time, and we've tried to increase prices certain places or get margin other places. But I think in general, just kind of knowing if it's going to be viable is really important, because like the mac nut butter that we first started, like our cost of processing and then putting it in a jar was probably $2 and $3, and we were spending like almost $9 and selling it for $9, and we were losing money. And so that's just my kind of warning is don't sell a product where you're losing money, or you're unless you really believe there's a path down the road that's gonna change something. So yeah, happy to share that and get into questions about anything like that. And then I think that kind of wraps up this portion, and I can talk. We sell a lot online. We sell on Amazon, and I'm happy to talk about stuff like that. But I think for now we should just get into the Q&A.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. That was awesome. And I think that breakdown is really generous to be transparent in that way and to kind of demonstrate. Did I sit on the side? Just to demonstrate all of those factors that you have to think about, right, when you're setting your retail price, setting your wholesale price, and all of that. So I have some questions that I've kind of curated that I hope will be helpful to kind of get us started, and then we'll definitely leave time for your questions as well to make sure that your questions are answered. And I'd love both of your perspectives on these questions, because you both have different, realms of experience, and it's really valuable to hear more than one perspective on a particular question. So I'm going to start around growth, and just that hindsight is 2020, right? And it's also very valuable when you've had the success and the experience that you've both had. And I'm curious, what are the top 1 to 3 things that you wish that somebody had told you before you started growing that you maybe had to learn the hard way? You guys are still on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I would actually parrot one of Andrew's main points is about margins. I think making sure the margins are large enough, and also adapting your margins quickly as economies change. Even over the last year, I went through an exercise with a company recently where we just went through every email they've received from every vendor that they have, notifying them of price increases. And whether it's Matson or Young Brothers or Helco, and these jumps aren't small, they're 30% jumps all at once. But it's, the bookkeeper, it's the tomato supplier, it's every single thing in the value chain is increasing. And so watching that margin number very closely and making sure it's where it needs to be in order for you to survive is super important. And that was definitely a trend at Ola, where I think with every product iteration, I think we were releasing new products because there's always this innovative bug that every entrepreneur has, where you're like, maybe if we did this, or this sounds cool, you're always kind of being creative. But the other thing I think we were always chasing was higher margins. And I think, even Andrew touched on this, is there was this era, and I'm not saying it's gone, but there was definitely a strong era where you could just be a farmer and your margins were solid. And then it was margins started to erode away as the global economy started to take hold in Hawaii, and value add kind of came in. It was you need to be value add farmers. So you need to be a farmer and then also mark up your goods in order to support the farm. And more over the last few years, the theme that I hear over and over again is HVAP. And maybe you've heard this term. It's not just value add, it's high value add. And if you zoom out and you look at a lot of the companies that are doing really well in Hawaii, like as an industry, they're the ones that just have really large margins. And like spirulina, or like coffee, or even on the Ethos side, like cannabis. Or let's say you're making a glass of kombucha and it costs you 50 cents to make it and you sell it for $8 at your tap room. Like, those percentages are enormous. And so I think really looking closely at that stuff is pretty key.
I think for me, not getting too hung up on your idea of what your brand is going to look like and being adaptable. I think I already kind of talked about that, like the Mac Nut Butter example. It kind of failed for us, but actually we just relaunched it now and it's working for us now. So, but for a while I was 100% in on it, and then I was 100% out on it, and then now I'm like back in on it. And so like things change, and your consumers change. People want Mac Nut Butter more than they used to. And then I think another example of just being adaptable is Nathan and I, my brother, when we first like launched the brand, we're gonna like crush it in like health food stores on the West Coast. And so we got a distributor in San Francisco, and we got into like 30 like high-end health food stores there. And I'm like, this is gonna be great. And like, we're just gonna expand from there. And like, that's our customer. And it didn't completely flop, but it flopped pretty good. Like, we definitely lost money on it. And we underestimated just how important the local market was. And in retrospect, we probably should have seen that coming, but we just thought like, oh, health food consumers are willing to pay more. And what ended up happening is we were on a crowded shelf. We didn't have people there that were managing the shelf. Our distributor was charging us 20% markup, and then the grocery store was doing 50 to 60%. So we were priced way too high, and it just didn't really work out. And so, but I think we decided to move away from that, and we, cut that relationship with that distributor. But if we were like, no, we're gonna make this work no matter what, we would have lost even more money. And so knowing when to be like, hey, something doesn't work and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It just means you're changing. And I think that's something that I've learned. And we've had to do that in all sorts of aspects of our business, from the farm side to that, where we've changed, and sometimes it hurts to give something up, but it might be the right decision.
Thank you both. This question just popped into my head, so I'm going to ask it of both of you as well. But I'm curious your perspectives and opinions on how many SKUs or different product types you would recommend, a fledgling or kind of beginner level company to start out with. Have you seen companies that have started with too many SKUs and that's tanked them, or maybe not enough and there hasn't been enough variety? I'm just curious what your personal experiences and opinions are.
I'll start with, just so everyone knows, a SKU is like another word for like a flavor or like a different style. So we have our 4-ounce chili pepper that you guys can try, and we have a 20-ounce sea salt. Those are two different SKUs. I think that's one of those answers where like I personally am like, it's so much easier if you just have 1 or 2 really good products, or like we started with 3 and it's like so much better. But at the same time, like our competitors take up shelf space because they have more flavors and it works for them, but it's a pain to manage. So I think there's a give and take with that one. So know where, if you're not going to be able to manage all of your SKUs and you're going to be going out of stock on, 3 out of 20 of them all the time, then don't do 20. But if you can handle that, and you can handle all the record keeping, the compliance and everything, and making sure you don't run out of pouches for your chili pepper mac nuts, like I think it kind of depends on where you're at as a business. But yeah, Nathan always has good ideas for new flavors, and I'm like, it's one more thing for me to like have to keep track of or get organic certification on, and I'm like, no. So yeah, that's my non-answer.
Yeah, Similar. I think less is more. I mean, I think entrepreneurs and creatives are like this. Like every entrepreneur is kind of a creative person, I think. And you see it, like you're approving logos, you're doing your website in the beginning, you do business card, banners, you're doing marketing. Like in the beginning, you're doing everything. And I think that creative spirit is always sort of nudging you to make more products. We should do this and we should do that. And what if we added this and da da da. And the thought experiment I think is like good in instances like that, where you want to do a new product or somebody recommends you do a new product, is take a given, like start with one really solid thing. And plenty of brands have gone really far with one thing. There's like, more or less one Tapatio, right? Or one like Pepsi, or one, like a lot of brands like make it really big and just have one product. And if they do have variants, it's just a couple. But take one that you know well, and it's in a given market, and do the thought experiment of like, what happens to your revenues when you add a second one? And in an ideal world, like where everything was really great, you would say, oh, I go to this market and I bring this product to market, and at this farmer's market I make $1,000. And if I came up with a second flavor, would I make $2,000? And it's almost certainly no, right? You wouldn't make another 1,000 because you brought a second thing. You would make like some percentage. And my experience is that percentage is like a diminishing returns thing. So you bring your second one and you make 20% more. And then you bring your third one and you make 10% more. And then 5%, da 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 da. And as you're introducing these new products, like Andrew said, your complexity is increasing. So now you have sort of this hidden overhead of like, you got to keep pouches and you got to keep barcodes and you got more stuff in the spreadsheet, and you got ingredients, you got supply chains, you got suppliers you got to deal with, certifications, like all this. So now your overhead is increasing, and if the return in terms of revenues is not sort of matching those increases, it might not make sense. And so I'm all about like doing tests and doing test markets, and you'll see this in grocery stores too. Like suddenly a brand will have some like weird new thing and you're like, oh, broccoli flavor, like okay. And half the time they're just testing it out. And they might have 10 in the queue. They might have like a bunch of variants where they're like, our cheese pizza makes a bunch, but we want to add a second one. And we tried the broccoli and that made 20%. And we tried the other one and it made 5%. And they'll just try, and then they'll throw away 9 of them and be like, this is the highest percent increase for a new added product. And so we're going with that one. And they'll just like grind through products that way. And so it's definitely like a do the math kind of project, I think.
Thank you. Wondering if you can talk us through the pros and cons of vertical integration. So is trying to control your own supply chain, growing your own ingredients, or owning your own processing smart for early stage founders, or is it usually too much too fast?
I think we would have had a hard time getting our brand off the ground if we tried to be like, we're going to control everything. And so we were able to get the brand off because we worked with a processor that was willing to certify organic while we certified our MacNut fields organic. And then after, they wouldn't package them into pouches for us. And so then I had to find an organic certified co-packer to package the MacNuts into the bag. And like we were shipping MacNuts from here to California and back, and it was kind of messy. And we try to do less of that now. We still do our chocolate in California, but like we're doing our salted and unsalted at the food hub, like 10 minutes from our farm. But I don't think we were ready to buy the equipment ourselves, make all of those investments. And so I think don't be afraid to get started relying on others. But at the same time, I've had a lot go wrong with like co-manufacturers, co-processors, partners, and yeah, a lot can go wrong. So just be careful.
Yeah, I think like the classic like value add vertical marriage is like a farm and a product, right? And so it's like, and we talked about this too. I think we had a lead up conversation to this, and depending on whose view you look at it from, changes a lot in terms of how you look at the vertical being a positive or a negative. So let's say you have a dragon fruit farm. and every year you're getting less and less per pound. And you might get pushed out of business, like the amount of money you're making as just being a plain old dragon fruit farmer is going down, and you start making dragon fruit leather or something like that, fruit roll-ups. And suddenly you can charge a lot for that, and that brings in a lot of extra cash into the farm and it helps support the farm, and it makes the entire business work. And in that case, if you ask the question, like, is value add a good idea? It's like, obviously, you got to save the farm, otherwise you're going to lose it. If you look at it from the other perspective of, let's say you're a chef, and you're really creative, and you got this idea, and you want to make dragon fruit leather, and you're going to do these fruit rolls, you got a cool recipe and a neat brand, and your uncle owns a distribution company, and you're like, this is like a cool product, I really want to scale. Should I start a dragon fruit farm? Like, probably not. Probably you should just let the pros do it, and don't vertically integrate on this one and just buy it. And also, if your main supplier goes under, you could buy it from another one, and you don't have the single point of failure thing going on, and you can just focus on your brand and scaling and all that kind of. So I think, yeah, the viewpoint definitely matters. And at least Ola has been a mix of like buying things from commodities markets and other suppliers and other island farmers, and then also doing a lot of homegrown stuff. And then on the Ethos side, it was legal mandate, like we had to be a vertical. It's definitely one of those, like, find kind of where you want to excel and then do the little math experiment to see if it makes sense for you and your business for the vertical.
Okay, next, moving on to operations and packaging. So packaging doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to work. What are the non-negotiables, design, margins, labeling that founders need to get right from the very beginning?
I'd say there's a lot of resources out there on making sure your packaging is compliant. But it does depend on where you're selling. Like if you're selling in a grocery store, you got to make sure you have your barcodes, your ingredient panels, allergen warnings. And if you're selling in more informal markets, it's not a bad, I think it's a good idea to start working towards that. Because if you want to grow and scale, you're eventually going to need it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of resources. I'm happy to, if people have ideas and they want me to look at their packaging, I'm no FDA expert, but I can usually pick out if something's egregiously wrong. So I'll feel free to reach out to me and other people who have done it before. But yeah, I would just say rely on the information that's out there and don't ignore it.
Yeah, I think there's that technical aspect of are all the barcodes there? Are the nutrition facts correct? Are the minimum font sizes there? On the art side, this is just my personal opinion, but I just love clarity, just a clear value proposition. Just when I'm holding this, I don't have to think at all. I know exactly what these are and what they do and what the point of it is. And there's no and I think sometimes entrepreneurs will try to be clever and they're well, we want them to think. And it's we don't want them to think. We just need them to know that it's strawberry jam and there's this jam in the jar and you can eat it, and and so just being very clear about the label and it being technically correct. I think those are key. And if you ever, I do this, I wander around grocery stores sometimes and I just look at stuff. You just look at other packages. Big companies, huge corporations, have spent millions on designers and design theory around why that font is the way it is and how things are arranged and the hierarchy of data. And if you look at your product and you look at a bunch of others and you see there's a huge disparity, it's easy to zero in on why is mine different and what is different about it, and get closer to that information science that makes it work, I think, so.
Follow up on that, just any specific local brands or national brands come to mind that you think are getting it really right in terms of that clarity that come to mind, or, and this is a little bit harder, any that you see that might not be? Of course, we don't want to pick on the locals, but.
Island Harvest, Hawaiian Ethos, and Ola Brew, they're the best. No, I'm just kidding.
That's awesome.
Local brands or national brands that you see getting it right, and why, I guess, just to kind of drive that point home a little bit more clearly.
I'm going to preface this by, I think a lot of this is personal opinion, but I think I personally, put yourself in the consumer's shoes, and there's a fine line between this is like a homey product that has like that gets like feels homemade and people appreciate that versus is this product going to be trusted? Because people are pretty, like, not everyone, but people are pretty like scrutinizing in terms of like they want to trust their food products specifically. And so I think things like, you know, the lot codes on the back and stuff like that, if those are like, you know, handwritten or something like that, then that's gonna, I think that's gonna get you in trouble or, you know, so like I think any way you can professionalize it. I'm not gonna call anybody out though. So I can't think of anybody that has a bad brand.
Or good. I mean,
Yeah.
just, or someone who's getting it really right.
No.
Yeah. I'm all about simple, like straightforward, easy. Like, it's not flashy, but the folks at Nutrex and the Spirulina products, like it is what it says on the bottle. And it's a green product. It's a green bottle. It's right there on the front. You know exactly what you're getting into. Like, I think that's exactly what most brands should aim to do. Is just like have a value proposition and plainly communicate it. Like, clearly to everyday people. Yeah.
Moving on to funding and money, what are the realistic funding options for a value-added food business that's too early for investors but needs more than a personal credit card? Accelerators, co-ops, grants, what can you point to that's really worked?
I think everything on that list I've touched in one way or another, and I really like grants. I think grants are really great. I think accelerators can be good. A lot of times the accelerators or incubation programs or those kind of projects are connected to an angel group. They're usually connected to like Blue Startups is connected to an angel community of investors, right? And the idea is you do well and they'll connect you with their investors and you kind of get their blessing because they're like, hey, they went through our program, they did really well, they're an all-star brand. And here's our investor network, and maybe you have a chance at some venture capital. Grants are great. I would, whether it's grant capital, investment capital from friends and family, or it's like early stage angels. I think the big thing is like, make sure you're spending the money on growth and not OpEx. I think that's the really big one. And I think with grants, sometimes I see companies, they'll build a model where they start to lean on the grant as like part of their income. And then they'll get to this thing where like they need the grants in order to survive. And then when they're not there for some reason 1 year, they're in like really challenging times financially. And so I love using that kind of money to like support growth initiatives. Like, we're gonna move into Portland and we're gonna open up that market. Or we're going to launch a new product line, or we're going to build a factory or something like that. But I think when you get into using that capital for OpEx, you get into sort of challenging territory. But the grants are so cool. And some of them are easy. Like, if you're under 100K, like the amount of paperwork is like relatively straightforward. I think for me, it's like as soon as you break 6 figures, you get into like more complicated grants. But it's worth it, and they make you do like a business plan and financials and audited financials and feasibility analysis and that kind of stuff. But if you get them, and like it's free money. I mean, you're taxed on it, so it's not free money. But I mean, that's a really great source for sure. Yeah.
I think Chris, touched on a lot there, and I don't need to rehash all of it, but I think one thing that I would add is that, like, when we started the Island Harvest brand, we didn't put a whole lot of money into it in the beginning. We tried to keep it pretty cheap on website, logo, packaging design. And so it doesn't have to be expensive. And then I was also like working, we're working on the farm, and then I was working another job while I was working on that. And so don't underestimate just like keeping your stable income while you get this thing going. I think that's how a lot of people start. And that's, your time is your investment there. And then I've also served on the board of the Hawai'i Ulu Co-op for many years, and that's like a whole different one where We tapped into tons of grants, state funding, different foundations have given us low interest debt. We've raised capital from our membership pool. And there's just like this huge, like what they call a capital stack that has, a bunch of different ways that we've raised money. And that's also like worked for that organization. So, I think Island Harvest, we kind of like bootstrapped and just tried to like do it little by little and slowly over time. But there's other ways to go about it too.
And speaking of both incubator or accelerator programs as well as grants here, on the local scene, can you all please touch briefly on any of your personal experience with various programs, as well as grants, and just like naming them and what the value was, for your company or your brand going through a program like that, and what, companies or individual brands really need to be aware of what they're committing to, at the outset?
So I've been through a number of like accelerator programs with Island Harvest, and then also participated with the Hawaii Ulu Co-op, Elemental Accelerator, Hawaii Investment Ready, Mana Up Accelerator. And I think all of them have something really valuable to offer, and it's kind of a matter of if the timing is right. And so just an example, the Mana Up Accelerator, we got in pretty soon after we like launched our brand, and they were able to introduce us to Foodland, to like a bunch of other grocery stores, and we were able to quickly get in. And that was one of those examples of where it worked really well for us. But it kind of, it depends on timing. And then I would also just give like, it's one of those things where you get in what you get out what you put in, right? A lot of those are really time intensive as well. And so if you're an entrepreneur that's strapped on time, you're really gonna have to think intentionally about how many programs you want to join, because it's gonna pull you away from making your MacNuts.
Yeah, I think like the value-added producer grant is great. I think if you're already doing value add and you haven't interacted at all with the Kohala Center, I think they're a pretty interesting group to interact with too. They're kind of like a funds aggregator in a way. They just are connected to a bunch of different grants. And I remember one year too, I was talking to one of the directors at Kohala Center, and they were saying, do you know any farmers that need money or need grants, and would you be willing to help write some applications and things like that? And they were basically saying, we're coming up on our last quarter, and we'll have 1.2 million this year that we have to give back to our funders because there wasn't anybody to give it to here this year. And I was asking why, because all the farmers go to the farmers market. It's like everybody wants money, you give away $1 million easily. And they were just saying the applications that they were receiving were like, people were really not putting a ton of effort into them. So they were receiving applications that were like 5 pages, and they were just like iPhone photos of their farm with a little caption and just saying how much money they needed, and it was just like ultra rudimentary. And so, in the early days at OLA, when grant capital was really important to us, like we took those relatively seriously. I think there was it was 3 or 4 years that we filed for larger grants for equipment or projects or initiatives. And even, spending a week of just like solid heads down time, doing your financials and kind of modeling out what you want to do with the grant. I think it's time well spent, and you'd be surprised actually of just putting like a little bit of effort into that, at how much capital is out there wanting to support farming and value-added ag farming. And the cool thing about a lot of grants is that, not all, some of them are a little cagey, but in a lot of cases, like you'll file for them, and let's say you don't get it this year. A lot of them are repeating every year. They'll give you a score, and they'll be like, well, we were judging you on 13 points or axis, and it's 10 points per thing, and you got a 10 on this and a 10 on this, and you only got a 3 on this, and da-da. And so if you would just put more in this section, and you could be like, oh man, I missed it by like last year, I did a grant that I wrote that I missed it by 0.5 point. And it was for like $500,000. And I was like, are you serious? And it was like the Parker guys got it instead of my project. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So then the next year, I just took my app and everything where my score was a little low, I just like optimized it to the max and I just overkilled it and I won it the next year. And it was like, cool, okay. It wasn't wasted time. And so I think those are definitely valuable. And again, it's like, you're not giving away stock. You don't have to pay it back. It doesn't impact your cap table. You do have to pay taxes on it, so save for that. But yeah, it's a good source of capital.
And you all mentioned the Value Added Producers Grant. That's a USDA grant. We have an Office of Rural Development here on the island based in Hilo, and those folks will help you with that grant. So just know there are resources. Ag Stewardship Foundation is a good resource. They put out a newsletter with a lot of different opportunities, and the Kohala Center as well. So if you're not on those mailing lists, get on them and start to see what's available, because there's a lot to tap into, like they said. Okay. Most food businesses, this is about marketing and sales. Most food businesses start with farmers markets, friends, word of mouth. At what point do you need to think more seriously about wholesale or selling to other businesses? And how is that a completely different game than direct to consumer?
I think it's just it's a different math problem. So like when I was showing you our margin breakdown, like we wholesale a bag for $9, and is that going to work for you if the grocery store or the distributor tax on 20% and then the grocery store tax on 40 or 50%? And then like I think when you're getting into the wholesale market, you just have to be like ready to scale and fulfill orders. So like we've run into issues where it's like, oh great, we got this new customer, and then it's like, oh no, they ordered 100 cases of something and like we don't have that right now. And so it's like, okay, like so it can be a little bit of difficulty just like logistically. And then the final thing too is like just getting into a store doesn't mean you're gonna like do well in the store. So like we got into like Long's, right? And I think they have like over 100 stores in the state, and like it hasn't really gone well for us. And in retrospect, like maybe that wasn't the best decision for us because we didn't have the capacity to really manage it well, and it was a little bit outside our like target market. So yeah, I think there's a lot to weigh there, but at the end of the day, just make sure the math makes sense in terms of what you're selling it to the grocery store or a distributor.
Yeah, and there's strata too. Like, they're not all. So if you start at farmers market and you think, well, what's the difference between farmers market and wholesale? There'll be like easy wholesale accounts where it's like a one-on-one relationship, and you know the store owner, and it's like, oh, I just sell my stuff to Bob, and then they mark it up and they sell it, and that's like easy level. And then more sophisticated is something like Foodland, where now I'm working through a distributor. And then even more sophisticated is like Whole Foods, where now I'm working with a broker who's working with a distributor who's working with a retailer, or like Safeway. Or let's say you're opening up a hub of like Walmarts on the East Coast or something, and they're all clustered together. And you're working with like someone who's managing the networked relationship. And so I would just like get good at the small, easy relationships, and then level up and get good at those, and then level, and like, but it doesn't have to be like 0 to 60. It doesn't have to be like suddenly, you're dealing with like very sophisticated markets and wholesale accounts and margins.
And this is my last, I have lots of other questions if we don't have questions, but I do want to make sure you all have time. So this is the last one on my list that I really wanted to get in. Trade shows are often recommended to small producers. What's the honest return on that investment? When is it worth going? When should you skip it? And which trade shows do you think locally, within the island chain would be the ones you'd want to target the most?
Yeah, I mean, they can often be a loss, right? Like, that's the truth, is that like trade shows can very often be a loss, and there's so much work. You talk to entrepreneurs that are in the middle of doing something like that, and it's like hectic. It's like flights, and then I got hotels, and I'm spending all this money, I'm bleeding cash, and then you're just like praying you break even on this thing. And so one is I tend to look at a lot of trade shows as marketing expense. Like, I don't even know if we're going to make money on this thing. But in advance, I will do sketches. I'll do a lot of math to kind of predict what I think is going to happen. And I usually base it on population. So I'll look at like how many attendees came last year, how many booths are there, how many are expected to come this year. and I'll do like a projection. I'll just basically say like, okay, well, if there's 50,000 people and I sell to, 10% of them and each one spends $20, then, and I'll sort of get a feel for it. And I'll even break it down to, usually if I go with a team, I'll break it down to, out of every person that passes, we need to have X number of people that we pull in that makes a sale of this in order to be above water on this. So hour by hour. Like, and I'm usually calculating in my head, like, okay, like, and that just helps give your team and yourself a target for like, okay, I'm showing up this thing and I know that every 20 people that walk by or every 100, I need at least one sale. It gives you like some, rather than just like, you're just sort of floating in empty space at the will of whatever the market is going to do. You have some idea for how to make it work. And then definitely if you've done one before, you have this great gem of predicate knowledge. Like, okay, I did it last year and I made this much. What could I do next year in order to make a little bit more and at least break even? And to be totally transparent, like most trade shows, I go for break even. And there are some every once in a while where they bring in real revenues, but it's few and far between. Those are like highly specific events. Yeah.
Yeah, I just add that different trade shows function differently. So like we went to Natural Products Expo in LA, and that is a trade show where it's mostly marketing. And some people are able to like get wholesale orders there, but most times you're not even selling anything and you're just giving away free product. And like we definitely like spent a lot of money to go there and be there and exhibit. And we didn't necessarily see like an immediate, like we didn't even sell anything at that trade show. So I think talk to people who've been to that the trade show before, and figure out what type of trade show it is and if it fits where you're at. And just to kind of contrast that, like the Made in Hawaii Festival is a big one here in Oahu. And we do that one like every other year. And that is one where like the public comes and buys local products, and you make like usually you like make a good amount of money, and hopefully like I think a lot of people make a ton of money. We do okay, like maybe slightly over break even. So just talk to people who have been to the shows before to kind of figure out what type of trade show it is, or even if you're vending at wherever you're doing like a Christmas pop-up or stuff like that, kind of try to talk to other people that have done it before, because they usually are like, no, don't go there, it was terrible.
Are there any other specific trade shows beyond the Made in Hawaii one that you would recommend, or that have been really worthwhile for any of the brands that you've worked with?
I would say like the pop-ups, like Christmas, like holiday pop-ups, and like pop-ups down at the hotels. Those can be worthwhile.
I think the CPG one was pretty cool that happened recently in Oahu. It was neat to see a trade show that was specifically designed for B2B relationships. So it was not customers, it was distributors and wholesale accounts and retail buyers and things like that. And that's cool, I think. Like I prefer that kind of trade show better, where every person I'm talking to, CPG.
Startup CPG, I think, like put it on, right?
Yeah. Startup CPG. And that's just nice, so that everyone you're talking to is like a representative from a store who wants to carry your product in their store, for the most part. That's kind of cool. And you're talking to less people, you're giving away less product, it's less time, and if you manage the relationships right, it could be higher long-term ROI. Yeah. And then I think the Expo West thing is cool. Like, you're talking about the Expo West in LA, yeah. And Ola did it for years, and we did it two ways. Sometimes we would go with a booth and a team and packaging and products and all this stuff and spend 20 grand to like be at the Expo West. And then other times we would just go as patrons and just like walking around looking at brands and looking at like how people are packaging things and looking at competition and also it's not just packaged goods companies there, there's also distributors, there's also retailers. And so that's an opportunity to just like walk the event and be like, we'd like to carry our product in your store and hand out business cards and hand out product. And we'd show up with just bags of product and pay the entry fee and just be like, you should carry this, you should carry this. And you're just doing a bunch of like market homework. And so if you're thinking about going, and it is a really large expense, also consider just like attending as a person before you spend all the money, just to see what it's all about and talk to people that are in the industry. Yeah, so.
So I'm going to open it up to audience questions, and please do speak into this mic. Chanston will bring it around for you. It's not going to amplify your voice, but it's for our video recording, so we make sure that we record your question.
Yes, talking about trade shows, Melly Y, June Honey Company did pretty well with what they did. Kind of an extended show. They went to Oahu for 3 months and did farmers market at the Aloha Stadium. And after that period, they came back home and they can't keep up. So it is something that is locally marketed. They're not shipping it out anywhere. They got enough for what they want to do with now. And so it's another way to go, just to local market something. Easier than giving away a bunch of stuff and not selling anything.
Yeah, and I have heard of companies having success with that model. Like they'll go to Oahu, they'll do a whole like campaign, and I've heard like stories where people come back with like a positive experience and a negative one, and often the difference between those experiences is when they went. Did they go during high season or not? And I think timing it right so that you go when there's a lot of money moving through that economy is like a great thing, and not go, during a low period so that you make them, maximize that.
My other question went to macadamia nut. For a while, we had producers of a macadamia nut cheese, which I thought was pretty successful. And for a little 2-ounce container at $9 in the store, I thought, well, that's a pretty good margin too. I don't know what their sales quantity was like, but is that something you guys are interested in?
Yeah, I think we're interested in anything macadamia nuts, and we'd love to do it all. But it goes back to, so like I think the mac nut cheese is refrigerated, right? And so like I personally have shied away from like getting into refrigerated or frozen because that's different from what we currently do. And that's not to say that we shouldn't do something like that. I think it's a good, it would be great for us to do, but I know it would extend us because there's, different kind of rules and guidelines on to managing refrigerated and frozen that we probably don't quite have the capacity for yet.
If you have like a budget of not any money very much, and you're starting and most of it is just sweat equity, but time is something you could use more of, where's one place you would like outsource something? Like what's something that you're like, this is just don't even bother to do it yourself? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, what I would do is like take all the tasks that add up to your business. Like I don't know what exactly your business is, but there's all these tasks associated with every business. There's like, let's say you're a farmer and you making your own compost, and then you spend this much time on irrigation, and then I would isolate each of those groups and find the thing that is taking a lot of energy but is low output in terms of revenue, and try to focus on those things first. So if there is areas and you'll know it for your particular business where it's like, this does take a lot of time and it doesn't really do a whole lot for my bottom line, can it either be cut entirely somehow, or can I outsource it? I think those are like prime candidates. And usually if I have that kind of conversation with an entrepreneur, they know already, like something pops up immediately where they're like, oh yeah, why am I still doing that? And so it's going to be unique, but just find the thing that's like high energy, low revenue. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. I'll start with, so we have a business which right now is essentially 97% retail, making product fresh, over the counter, 3% wholesale. We just started a wholesale side of things. Margins are thin across the board because overhead's high, operating business here, and just at our scale, I mean, it is what it is, right? We don't have all the resources at hand. And so how much of the wisdom you have for value-added products applies to like fresh-made product versus a packaged product, which has, whole different sort of pipeline?
So the closest analog is definitely on the Ethos side, which the freshness is a thing. It is packaged, right? It's shelf stable, but also on the beer side. Green bottle beer is really popular in Hawaii because that's the beer that does well when it's shipped across the ocean in a 40-foot container in the hot sun for a really long period of time. It tastes the same when it shows up, right? And that's like why it's popular. At Ola, it was really important to not do that, to not make beers that were like bomb-proof in terms of flavor, but like tasted good. And that meant refrigeration. And that meant tighter shelf lives, and that meant fresher batches and smaller batches and managing for all those components. And I guess the short, summary of it is that I have a lot of respect for the entrepreneurs that do that, do the mac nut cheese and the kombuchas and all that stuff, because it's lower margins and it's a very complicated business. It's not just complicated in that you have this thing that you're trying to keep fresh, but your margins get tied up also in that things go bad. So sometimes you might deliver a certain bolus, like I know that mac nut cheese company, I think the one you're talking about. And one of the challenges is you drop off 20 units and 10 of them sell and 5 of them are still in their right window, and then 5 of them have to get trashed because they hit a certain expiration point. The other thing is that, like for value-added products that are shelf-stable, you get used to a certain price for distribution. And when you're distributing a fresh thing, now you have to have refrigerated distribution. And the care and handling is a little different. Like at Ola, suddenly when we moved to something that wasn't shelf-stable and it was beer, suddenly we have these little devices that have to go on every pallet, and they're measuring temperature. And they're basically they're logging it so that when it gets to the other side, we can collect those devices and we can be like, did it ever spike over a certain point? And if it did, the product's not what we wanted. You allowed it in the value chain to like get too warm, and we don't want it to ever reach a certain ceiling. That's extra complexity. And then from a retail side, they tend to make their markup higher, because they're having to pay all the extra electricity to keep it in a refrigerator and like keep it fresh for somebody, and they have to monitor it. Like the store has to constantly be looking at it, and it's valuable shelf space. If you look at the architecture of a store, most of it is shelf stable, and then on the outer edges are all the fresh stuff that they're having to constantly monitor. That takes time and money to monitor it. And so everything about that universe is more challenging. But they're great products, and I love them. Like I love fresh beer, and I love fresh kombucha and the fresh cheeses and all that stuff. But that's the universe you're working in, and so it's just like they tend to cost a lot more because it's harder to make and harder to run the business. So anyway, that's my kind of experience and take on that, for sure. It's challenging.
Yeah, I don't have the expertise other than like chocolate can melt. And the more you're shipping, the bigger the mistake can be. And so I think that would be the comparison, is that if you ship $10,000 worth of product and it all goes bad, it's going to hurt a lot more than $100 worth. So just trying to do risk management is important with that type of product.
Yeah. Is it a food thing or a drink thing?
I'm sorry?
Is it a food or a drink?
Oh,
Ice
food.
cream.
It's ice cream.
Yeah, it's ice cream. Yeah. Yeah.
So your point about spoilage, yeah, noted. The second question is, so we have a product that does really well, people love it, the reviews are incredible, which is nice, but again, margins are thin, we're operating kind of on a shoestring, we've done a lot to get it to a certain point. What advice would you give in terms of scaling? Like, what are the things we should look at, and like, what should we lean into versus what should, like, I understand simplification and some things make a lot of sense, but are there any like sage advice, like you said, things you wish you would have known 10, 20 years ago that would kind of help us figure out what the next steps are? There's so many options where we can go with the business. How do we, what are the key indicators we're looking for to say this is the thing we should lean into, not this other thing? Or is that why we hire a consultant?
I mean, yeah, definitely have consultants in your Hui, but I think like one thing is usually when you have a spectrum of products. Like if you do an ice cream, I imagine you have probably like multiple flavors. And not always, but most of the time there's this like 80-20 rule where like 20% of the products make up 80% of the revenues. And when you think about scale, identify those as the targets for scale and leave everything else for like smaller markets. And just sort of identify like most of our revenues come from these couple of things, and just like drill into those as being the things that you want to increase efficiency and production and entry into new markets and introductions and all that stuff. Like focus on those. And then if in the future, when those are successful, you want to bring up some of the other lesser flavors, then like do that, but focus on the heavy hitters first. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. If you have like a hero product and you can get the margins better on that by like making the process more efficient, like I would just double down on that and try to, like, if you know you have something good, go with the thing that you know is good.
Hi, guys. A quick random question about grants, which is something I noticed that both of you touched in on, or all of you actually, on the, going for grants, the accessibility of them. I have done that quite a bit, and I've noticed at the season I'm at of scaling, a lot of the grants I'm going for are reimbursement grants, which means you have to have all the money up front, buy all the things, all the machines, the whatnot to utilize. Then you get the grant, hopefully, and over time they pay you back for the money that you had to put up front to do that. So I've noticed as I get a little bit more into industrializing my production, because I do co-pack off island, but we also are seeing that it's potentially becoming more cost effective for us to bring that packaging back here as we're growing because of the cost of shipping frozen, because we're almost at container stage, but we're not there yet. And so we're stuck in this very uncomfortable season of growth where it's almost like, okay, do I turn around now and just start over and do it all over and just buy enough equipment to get us through this season of the next year until we can make some decisions? In the meantime, I know I jumped over my question, but my question is, so with these grants that come up that are like, USDA, you can go, like, you're working with, local farms, the community, sustainability, all these things. So I have a lot of checks, although the one check that's missing is the $125,000 to put up for the equipment up front to get the grant that I check off all the boxes for, because I have to pay it up front. And so is this, and I'm finding that to be more typical with what's available in grants with looking for certain things. And so not a lot of people in my world have chatted about that. Or people that I'm working with are working from nonprofits or different things. So there's different avenues of funding. If something like that comes up, and this is a general question, is it something where you're like, wow, that's a really big shoe in, I'm going to trust that, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to go to the bank, or I'm going to find an angel investor, I'm going to borrow the money from them because I'm eligible for this, put it up front? It's almost like it's a really interesting place to be, because I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that. And I'm finding that that is something that, as an individual business, not as a nonprofit or a or a group of people going in as an individual LLC, it's a little bit tricky right now, and I'm kind of lost.
Yeah, I do notice that too, right? Like a lot of grants are matching, where they're like, we'll give you $250,000, but you got to come up with $250,000. And even in the early days, Ola did a handful of those grants, right? And you already kind of listed them in terms of the options. Like back then, we had access to a grant. We knew that it was going to help us scale our business. It was terrifying, and we leaned on either lines of credit or early venture angel money in order to get there. And that was like the only way that we were able to make it work. I have found that venture money or just like early angel money is a little easier when you have like a solid grant in hand and it's a matching grant. And they're able to help capitalize something that's already in motion, and their dollar goes twice as far because of capital from USDA or wherever. But I think you've identified it for sure, and it is. I think of the two, if I had to choose, like where am I going to get this cash for the matching grant? If I had to do like a line of credit or venture money, I would choose the venture side. Like debt scares me a little bit, and that's a stylistic thing. Like I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and we all have different relationships with debt, and some are very comfortable, and they're like, I'll go 10 million in debt, like I don't care. And then I've always been like, I try to stay solvent. I try to keep like almost no debt. Like I really try to just like keep everything kind of bomb-proof on the financial side. But that sounds like that's the stage that you're at, is possibly, that venture capital, small, like early venture capital or loans, line of credit.
Yeah, it's a really,
It's scary though.
it's a really tricky thing, but it makes hand bottling look a lot more glamorous than it used to a couple years ago, because really at the end of the day, it's kind of like, oh, well, actually when I crunch the numbers and I do all this guessing and figuring, it actually sometimes starting back again a little more than, you go from here to there, but then sometimes it does make more sense to bring it back.
And it's the right kind of spending. Like when entrepreneurs are going to take in grant capital, you can spend it on all this different stuff. And my preference is always to spend it on growth and to spend it on equipment and assets that are depreciable and stuff like that. I love that kind of spend. And one of the cool things you can do about that, like if you are thinking about a bottling line or something like that, is that I always do the break-even math in my head of like, okay, if right now I pay these people to hand bottle this thing and it takes them 3 days, and here's how many units they make, and here's what that does for my cost of goods. And if I had this machine, it gets done, that 3 days turns into 6 hours. And so I save all this money in labor. And if I sort of stack all that money saving in labor over my projections, what I think I'm going to do, how long until that machine breaks even? And that's usually another like good gut check in terms of like whether it feels good to spend money on that thing. And in some cases it's crazy. Like you'll do the little napkin math and you're like, I would pay this back in a month. Or sometimes it's like, oh, this is over a year, or this is several years. Like this is kind of serious. Maybe I need to like reconsider it. My ballpark tends to be in like under 12 months. Like if it can break even in under 12 months, like I'm usually moving mountains to try to make it work, because that seems to be like a range that's acceptable. But yeah, I think it's the right kind of thing to be spending on.
I think the only thing that I'd add is that we've actually shied away from any venture, and we've always kind of done always done debt to keep like equity in the family business. And so when I first heard your question, like it's like credit line from a bank is probably like maybe the easiest way, but there's also quite a few foundations that specifically look at doing, food lending. So Feed the Hunger is one, and I'm kind of blanking on a couple other ones, but especially if you have a grant in hand and it's one of those things where it's like, I don't have the matching money for that, it's it's easier to go to some of those food specific lenders. And I know Maya knows a bunch of them as well, that will see that and be like, yeah, let's help you get that, especially if it's just really, if the grant is secure, it's a cash flow issue, right? And so most people should be willing to come forward for that if it's for the right reasons. So yeah, happy to connect you with people that I know too.
Yeah, and what I was going to say as well, Megan, is Feed the Hunger Fund very specifically. And there's different things. There's the matching that you might need for a grant. Sometimes grants are reimbursable, which means you have to do everything up front or certain percentages up front, and then you're getting those installments. But Feed the Hunger Fund will often provide like a bridge loan, so that because the grant is secured, if it's reimbursable and it's not matching, you will get that funding back. And they are very specifically focused on agricultural businesses here in Hawaii. So that would definitely be one to look at. And they often have much more favorable interest rates, that are below market because interest is really high right now. So it's extra scary, I think, to borrow for folks.
A Good Food Foundation, believe, is another one that might be able to help there.
And your grant, like the one that you're looking at better than anyone, but like a lot of times too, your portion that you need to pay, if they're gonna like match you, is like fungible, where you could pay it in labor, in like sweat, in value add crops that you're digging up, right? And so sometimes they'll allow, 50, 60% of the cash that you have to come up with can just be your hours as an entrepreneur, like the time that you're spending on your project. And I know that helps close the gap for a lot of people too.
Thanks for coming today. I think you both mentioned working with distributors. I was curious if you had any advice on finding distributors or working with them in general.
It's hard, you have your experience, I'm sure, but because what you're doing is, in the beginning, you're gonna do the math on when I distribute it, it costs this much. And if I let you do it, how much is it gonna cost? And are you gonna do a good job? Are you gonna support it on the shelf? Are you gonna make sure it doesn't run out? Do you do supportive marketing? Do you help get us into the store's mailer? Do you help manage sales that we wanna put on in that store? And I feel like even their percentages are always kind of a negotiation. They, almost every client they have a different percent, 20% for you and 15 for you and 28 for you or whatever. And they're I don't know, wrangling an alligator or something. They're just not, they always work, to get it all formed into okay, you're doing everything I want you to do at a price that I need you to do it at. And I personally have never had the experience of just wow, distributor, you just made this so nice and easy for me. Thank you. It's always but then if you do it right, you can get to a point where it's profitable and it allows you to scale or whatever. But distributors run on insanely small margins that all have to do with economy of scale and velocity. And so you have a giant truck and it's full of a whole bunch of stuff and they're just making micro margins on everything. And the whole thing adds up to them being able to stay in business. And so they look at their numbers really closely, and I feel like it's always kind of a negotiation to make sure that both parties get a fair deal. Yeah, my broad experience with that.
I would just add there's a couple things to look out for. One is what percentage they're going to operate off of, and then do the math. If you sell it to them, how much are they selling it to the store, and how much is the store going to charge, and does it still make sense for your customer? I think that's the most important thing to look out for. The other thing is that I didn't expect as much as a lot of distributors in grocery stores require marketing promotion. So every quarter, this health food store, you have to do at least 10 or 15% discount. And what happens is the distributor will mark down your product, and then on your payment, they'll deduct it off your invoice. And so it's all of a sudden my invoice that I sent my distributor that I thought was going to be $5,000 had all the promotion charges, and now it's $3,000. And then they'll always buy only in the promotion periods and not during the regular sales. And so there's a lot of ways to lose money with distributors. And so you need to have conversations about it, and it kind of is what it is. It's the game. But I would say for us, our margins aren't high enough to function with most distributors. And so we either have to look at changing our product somehow, or we do a lot of our own distribution, and we've leaned more into online sales and things like that because of that issue.
Well, I have a follow-up question on that of just in your experience with distributors, is that something that you're generally knocking on their door? Are you kind of pitching to them, or are they finding you and saying they want to distribute your product? And also just locally here, let's say in the grocery stores or the food hubs that are here on island or across the state, are there any stores that you're able to sell your product directly to? Do you always have to go through a distributor? If you can talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I've had both. Most of the times it's like you have to reach out to the distributor, but I did have one like broker find me, and I was a little skeptical at first, but it ended up working out pretty well. And then a lot of the local stores we've been able to do direct, where we deliver to them. But there's difficulties with that too. So for instance, like KTA and Foodland, we service directly. One of the issues with that, not having a distributor for them, is that we actually have to go into the store and put everything on the shelf, and like we don't have distribution in Kauai and Maui. And so then we FedEx it to them, and then nobody puts it on the shelf because we don't have a distributor there. And like some stores it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then I've ended up losing stores because of that. So like certain Foodlands, like I just like didn't go on the shelf or didn't sell well for whatever reason, but I would like nobody was in the store to really manage it, and so that caused issues. Whereas if I had a distributor, I probably would have been able to keep some of those accounts. But I would say like to me, some of the bigger chains like Long, Safeway, not sure about Whole Foods, like a lot of them want you to work through a distributor because they don't want 100 different vendors showing up to their stores. They want 20.
Yeah. And in some cases, distributors, like they'll have another layer between, like where you have to work with a broker, and you'll be working with the broker, and then the broker will work with the distributor, and then the distributor will work with the retailer. And like Whole Foods is like that, right? And that adds another layer and another chunk out of your margin chain, too, that costs money.
So I have a little snack shop in Kona at Ali'i Gardens Marketplace, and I only work directly with people from their companies. So like Kona K's cookies and Ohana cookies and things like that. So if you have any products, come and talk to me. It's a very small operation, but you got to start somewhere. And I like having as many locally made things that I can. I don't have the capacity for fresh produce so much, but I do have a freezer and a refrigerator for some things like drinks and stuff like that. I'm the baker, the banana bread maker, so I do my own baked goods and things, but I have other snacks like some mac nuts, I have some salts, I have some jams and jellies and whatnot. So if you have a product that you think I might be able to sell, I'd be happy to talk to you. So there are another option. You don't need a distributor to come to me.
And just a micro plug for food hubs here on the island as well. Obviously, I work with Kohala Food Hub. There are at least 7 of our vendors in this room right now, which is just so nice to see. And food hubs occupy this kind of space where we sell direct to consumer. We also sell to other businesses, wholesale. So we act as kind of mini distributors, but we don't have that double markup, in the chain. And we tend to keep our markups, lower than most traditional grocers, because it's just part of our value proposition to try to pay the most we can to producers while also keeping price point accessible to customers. And we work in partnership with Hilo Food Hub all the time. We do transportation for them. They do some cold storage and aggregation for us. And so if you sell your products with us and you're interested in us introducing you to Hilo Food Hub, we're super happy to do that as well. So we want to be of service.
All right, I had thank you guys for presenting and sharing. Really appreciate all your information. It's really terrific. I had a farmer's dream happen to me most recently, where a fellow named Jim Land came back into town. He used to do farmer's market and do a kitchen up there and serve a lot of food for everybody. Really nice fellow. They went on to the mainland for a little bit, and now they're back. He is sponsoring a company that wants to open up here in Hawaii 5 different facilities called Just One Organics. And in this facility, they're willing to put up money for farmers to produce. They're willing to pay the farmer for everything they do produce, number ones, and they're also looking at paying for number twos. And basically, they have a nationwide company that they are moving forward with, got to be organic, but they're moving forward with it and hopefully be in production here in the Big Island, North Shore here within the next 18 months, which is very hopeful for a lot of the small farms and a lot of the farms in general, because if you can actually get money up front to put your crop in, and then they're going to buy everything that you have, and then you're going to be able to do it again over and over again. It saves a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, which we've all been there in a lot of ways, the product development package and all that. This leaves the farmer doing his dream of just farming, mostly, and figuring out how that goes. So I'm very encouraged to hear about this, and I want to hear more how it goes. It is a Portland-based company, and they're also MAHA certified by Kennedy. So they've got a good name, and they sound like they got a really good show to bring to us, especially here in Kohala. So because I'm a farmer and involved in farming for a long time, I think it's a great advantage for us. And even if you're already selling your products, you could sell your extra products that you're not processing to this kind of company as well. So it gives you a chance to keep making money where instead of taking 600 pounds of tomatoes to the food basket or whatever, you can actually sell it, and they'll do something with it and make a product that's stable. Thank you.
I'll close us out with one last question for both of you, and just if there were one concrete thing that a brand can do to turn a first-time buyer into a regular customer, into a brand ambassador who's telling all their friends and family they need to buy this product as well. Obviously, it's very varied across all of the different types of products, but just what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to wrap it up. I was talking to Maya about this earlier, and I think the most important thing is I've been to a lot of the trade shows, the different vendors, and there's a lot of not so good products out there that maybe don't taste good, or you just what is this? Make sure your product's good, and it doesn't have to be good to me. It just has to be good to someone. That's the main thing. And with that, I'll say we have quality problems sometimes with our Mac nuts, and that pains me the most is delivering inferior quality product to our customers, because I want our customers to trust us. And I think that's the biggest thing is you want your customers to love your product for how good it is, and then just try to keep that as consistent as possible.
Yeah, I think it's if you want to get and maintain a long-term customer, it's like this experience they go through. And it's kind of like this courting process. And so in a retail environment, my go-to is I like people to see the brand 3 times before they even see it on the shelf somehow. There's a sticker on the store window, and they're like, oh, what's that? And then they see a little shelf talker thing, or there's a poster, or the employee of the grocery store is wearing a t-shirt of this, and then they see it. And the value proposition is simple. It's a Kohala salsa or something like that. And then they buy it, and then the salsa is good, and it's consistently good. And then there's layers to the brand, so that you read the back, and they're organic, and it's it's family owned, and they have this special tomato brought over from his Japanese grandpa in 1960, and no one else has this tomato, and and it's just the more you learn, the more rich and in depth the story is. It's if you can just visualize that whole experience of how someone found the brand, first bought a product and consumed it, and then found more information about the company that gave layers of depth afterwards, that situation is the recipe for a long-term customer that's going to love you forever.
Well, amazing wisdom shared here today. I feel like I could ask you 10,000 more questions, to be honest. And really, really appreciate your generosity, your expertise, your willingness to take the time. Once more, I want to mahalo Andrew Trump, Island Harvest, right here in North Kohala. And Chris Sandy of many brands, but Hawaiian Ethos, Ola Brew, Hawaiian Ola, and Spicy Ninja, who he's helping out right here in North Kohala as well, one of our other hometown brands. So, and thank you to all of you. We work with so many of you already. It's just so exciting, this notion of building and strengthening this local food economy, keeping our dollars circulated right here, really supporting a thriving agricultural economy and a food system here. So thank you all for all the hard work that you do every day. We are Kohala Food Hub. We do have a fully equipped commercial kitchen that is available for rent at the lowest rates that you'll find on island. And yeah, if you've earned your 10 free hours in the kitchen through attending the workshops in this series, please take advantage of it. We'd love to help get you a little bit further along, however we can. So thank you all so much, and thank you to Adam Polya of Lucky Tree Productions. Mahalo nui.